Greetings, everyone. Happy Sunday, June 14th, 2020. Our weekly market update today, similar to last week, once again, be a little bit quicker. Just go through the charts, look at what's going on, look at what happened on Thursday when we had a nice 5.5% sell-off on the S&P. Compare that kind of with the NASDAQ. That's showing us a little bit different of a story than our last weekly update last week and what that looks like in terms of a possible false break. We'll look back at the airlines and see how those worked out compared to what was projected last week. And then just do our normal updated trend info, what to look for, what to keep an eye on, where to look for price targets, things like that. And then only fundamental thing today that I'm going to go into a little bit is just something to keep an eye on during this wave two. One thing to keep a pulse of when you're seeing headlines and news that could be something very, very big for the market. And you would need to make sure you protect your positions if it ends up being the case. So just having it in the back of your mind is going to keep you safer than not. So that being said, let's hop right into the charts and see where we're at. So here's the 2 hour for the S&P 500 that we've been looking at for the last few weeks. And we'll go to the daily here in a second, but everything hit pretty much as planned. You know, that 3,200 got broken when I gave you guys the midweek update, but then held for a few days at that 3,220. That was the exact low from before. That again, we'll look at here on the daily chart in a second. And then that's what it reversed off of. And then we came all the way back down to this 29.75 level that we initially broke when we started this uptrend. So that was a great buying opportunity to ride the trend up. And until we see this thing broken to the downside, the trend is still up. And what happened on Thursday was just a pullback. All right. The one thing to note with it is that the quickness of the selling and the extent of it and the volume is what caused for concern a little bit more. And of course, if you just turn on CNBC or whatever, their headlines are just going to go with the way the market's going, right? If the market is tanking like it did on Thursday, they're going to say investors are worried about a second wave of the virus, and so the market's selling off. And then if the market goes up, their headlines are going to say investors are no longer as worried about the second wave of the virus, the market is rallying. Like it's unbelievable that they just flip the headline based on what the market's doing, and it's not really actually analyzation. But anyways, this is showing that there are definitely some sellers and some people out there that are going, okay, things have reached its peak. But again, until we break this to the downside, this was technically just a pullback and the trend would continue up. And so if that's the case, might see a little bit of support resistance here at this 3,100 level. But if we don't end up making it back up to the new highs, the point to look at on the 2 hour, if you're swing trading, is about 31.75. Usually what would happen if these are final highs is this would sell off, pull back up, and not make new highs, test those lows, and then turn back down, and then probably consolidate before it would break back down. So those are just price targets to watch, keep an eye on as things get there. And then if you see this thing broken to the downside on good volume, I'll send out a market update, a quick one if that ends up happening, and kind of review that with you, but that's what it's looking at on the 2 hour chart. So then if we go to the daily, this is where I said it's a little bit easier to see this 3,220 level, right? This was that final high that I mentioned when we broke this to the upside, right? We had the 30.65, then 3,200, and then this 3,220 level was right there. And then after that, it was up here at 33.20. And so this ended up holding. And like I told you guys last week, I was short when we hit 3,200, and then I closed out at the close of this day because we had carried up through 3,200, right? But then we stalled for 2 days and showed this kind of topping sign. So that's an indicator when it hits there that, okay, this level is actually holding. We're not just blowing right on through it. And that's what we've kind of sold off. But you can see everything is working out exactly as we kind of outlined over the last few weeks. But let's look at the NASDAQ real quick, because this is the one that's a little more cause for concern. So last week when we did the update was right here when we closed at a new high finally for the first time. Let's get the volume on here. Oh, there's no volume on this index. And then made an evening star pattern, and then this sell-off closing all the way back down through these old highs. It's just a little bit of a concern, right? Usually when you make an all-time high, especially after the sell-off we had and the recovery, usually you'd want to really see that high held. and it pop up through and then come back down, retest it, and then continue to go up. So the fact that it just broke through to the upside and then after one day immediately turned around and sold off, again, doesn't mean we're not in an uptrend. It just shows that there are people out there that are going, okay, this is not as strong as it was showing originally, right? It's not as strong as making new highs and this now being the kind of floor price for the NASDAQ overall. Instead, it was like, okay, we made some new highs, great, we recovered. No, we got to kind of revert to the mean. So this one we're gonna have to keep an eye on. But we told you last time when we looked at the fact that this went straight up in a vertical line, that's always cause for concern. So if this were to come back down even further on the NASDAQ, this 92.20, 92.30-ish, 92.50 level right through here would probably be a pretty decent support level. And then if we blow through there, obviously there's a lot more sellers in the marketplace than buyers. So that's what's to kind of keep an eye on with the NASDAQ. Just got to kind of see how that unfolds, but it's just showing that it's not as bullish as it looked when it finally made those highs. Then looking at the airlines, these worked out perfectly. Anybody that made these trades, I didn't even get in them myself. I don't know why. I had too much other stuff going on, and I'm kicking myself for it. So we were right here, walked, obviously I alerted you guys on this first day that we had to break out, and then you could have carried this, made a good 30-40% on them, and then I gave you guys the update on June 8th and said, hey, might be a good time to take some profits, because usually what these things do when they break out is they're going to have 3 or 4 days that are really strong, and then they're going to turn around and come back and retest these old highs before continuing up, right? So you could have taken your 30-40% profits, waited 3 days, and then gotten back in at a better price target or price level, and then let it ride the rest of the way up now. And the thing we'd be looking for, this is just United Airlines, but you could do the same thing with all of them. They look pretty similar, is you'd want to look to close out your positions if you get a close below this high right here, right? So this is kind of that final support resistance level that got busted through the upside. So that's what you'd be looking for there. But these worked out perfectly. That's a big money making opportunity. But I am back in long now to the airlines, and we'll ride them a little bit and see how far they run up. But especially on the amount of volume that they've had buying in, that's a really, really good thing. So there's the overall charts that we're looking at. So like I said, trend is still up until we break those lows. Thursday was just a pullback in that regard. And like I told you guys last week, what I usually see when these things run out of steam to the upside, I told you very rarely does it just go straight down, straight up, and then straight back down. Usually we'd see that impulse sell-off, then we'd recover and make it back kind of up to those highs like we did before and get some consolidation before, it would really turn into a downtrend. So we'll see if that holds this week. That holds true as of now until those 29.75 levels are busted. So it's very possible that can happen and things can sell off really quickly. But usually we would see it. There's kind of some consolidation period where people are like, is it going to go up? Is it going to go down? Should we be bullish? Should we not? And then finally one side prevails. And that's what you saw when we broke through those 29.75 levels to the upside. That's what people were wondering, right? We tested that 4 times over like a month. And finally people were like, okay, you know what? Yeah, we need to be optimistic and we're going to bust this thing through to the upside. So we could see that same thing up at the top, and it would either continue up or bust through and we'd cause a new downtrend. So just keep an eye on that. But the one thing to keep an eye on during this second wave that's getting hit. So I mentioned last week that I didn't really think that there's anything that we would do to close the economy again, right? The White House has made it very clear that they are going to take the market over the health and lives of citizens. And that was the concern early on. And if you look back at some of the very first updates during all of this, that was, the question that I posed and the biggest issue I had with the whole thing, and I remember the video that I said it on clearly, was that there is no discussion from the White House or from any media headlines of how are we going to act and interact as a society with the virus here. Right now, the plan has always been we either quarantine until it's gone or we're 100% open. And yeah, we've done these phase reopenings and everything, but it's all for show, honestly, at the moment, right? We're doing all these phase reopenings And the reason for doing it was to do it after cases had declined for a steady period of time and make sure that that stayed that way. Well, now you're seeing across the country that over 25 states now are soaring in cases, but everybody's just pushing forward and moving on to the next phase of reopening. Oregon's the only one that's come out and said, hey, we're putting a pause on it, right? So it's all for show. And I told you guys last week here in Charlotte, North Carolina, I was out again this weekend. Bars are just packed. Everybody is out. Nobody seems to care about it, which is why I said last week, I don't really see, even if this second wave is really, really bad and another 300,000 people die, which is terrible and which is what caused the panic selling and the shutdown of everything in the first place, people just don't seem to care. And so I didn't think that was going to affect the market a ton. But the one thing you need to keep an eye on, I think, is if you look back at why did we do the quarantine really in the first place, is because cases were outpacing the hospitals and they couldn't keep up with, ventilators, ICUs, all that sort of thing. And I've started hearing a little bit more discussion in the news about the fact that there are some states that are in that situation as we speak, right? So just looking at this, California ramping up, Florida just got really shellacked, like they're really turning up. Texas really turning up. North Carolina doesn't have a chart. We're really turning up. Alabama, but Arizona, according to CNN the other day, is at 86% capacity already in their ICU beds. So that was the one thing that kind of made me look and go, okay, if there is going to be something that would cause us to have to shut down the economy again, it would be that reason. And Trump has left it up to governors and everything and individual states to make that decision rather than him, so that he can take the blame and put it somewhere else, of course, as normal. But that's something to keep an eye on. If we see even a single state says, hey, we're going back to full quarantine because we can't keep up with the hospital beds and ventilators or whatever it is, just protect any long position you have, because again, this whole entire run up on the market has been on optimism that things are good, right? We're going to be back to normal. This was too oversold, blah, 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 blah. If we have to get another shutdown, you're going to see another one of this, and it might be even worse. So that's the only thing that I would say from that perspective to really keep an eye on. Because again, even through these days, you were seeing cases spike in states and nobody cared. So the news outlets are saying that this was caused by that, and that's why there was such a hard sell-off. Not really. That information had been out for days. So it's not like that was the first day that states reported new cases or things like that. So keep an eye on that. That's the one headline that if you see, that it could really, really spell some troubles for things. Other than that, I mean, hundreds of thousands of people are going to die, and it just seems to be, it is what it is, and that's all people really care about right now. So anyways, that wasn't outlined very well in that aspect of things, but hopefully that is some useful information for you guys. Have a great rest of your weekend. We'll update you this week, especially as we keep an eye on what happens from this point. Again, we should expect to see it reverse up for at least, might take 2 days, kind of reverse back up and then maybe turn back down, but just be on alert that now, until this is broken to the downside or until we continue these highs up, you just want to be careful with whatever positions you're in and just make sure you're smart about the stocks you're investing in if you're doing some swing trades. So have a great week. Update you as we can as the week goes on.